Welcome to the Music for the Soul podcast, where we talk honestly about difficult things. This is a place where music, hope, and healing come together. I'm Becky Nordquist.
And I'm Steve Seiler. Thanks so much for joining us. We are so delighted today to be able to share with you Dwight Liles. Dwight is a prolific songwriter, a kind, generous, talented man who has been an extreme blessing in my life and the lives of so many people through his work. Dwight, welcome.
Thank you, Steve. It's good to be here.
Well, I have to start where this relationship began for me. I was fresh off the boat to Nashville, and I had been offered a chance to come down to Star Song Music Publishing and meet and write with some of their writers. And I met Dwight, and I was actually, I wonder if you remember this, Dwight, I was kind of intimidated. Your reputation preceded you as somewhat of a legendary, successful songwriter. And I remember you came to my house, and the first thing that I did was say, I'm a little nervous because you're Dwight Liles. And you made me so comfortable. You basically poo-pooed that instantly, and we got right to work. And writing with you was so easy and so natural. So I thank you for that introduction to the Nashville writing scene.
Well, actually, the way that I remember it is you told me about having just gotten off the boat in Nashville. And I said, wait a minute, man, you are flipped out because Nashville is an inland city. No, I'm just kidding.
I was going to ask about that.
What about the Cumberland River?
Well, there's that, I suppose, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I guess you could have come via kayak,
Well, the first thing I learned about Dwight was that he was a huge Beatles fan, Becky. And of course, he was speaking my language right away. Dwight, do you remember we were gathered around in one of the writers' rooms and Ty Lacey?
The Ty Lacey story. I know, yes.
Yes. And Winona Judd had just released a song called Tell Me Why.
Right.
And we referenced the song Tell Me Why. And of course, we were referencing Tell Me Why.
Yes.
Cried from the Beatles days. And Ty was like, what's that? And Dwight picked up a guitar that was leaning
against the wall. It just
happened
happened to be a guitar handy. I don't even know where that guitar came from, but it just happened to be laying around.
You picked it up and launched into that song, played the whole thing on the guitar, and put the guitar back and go there.
It was just such a typical Beatles fan moment.
And while we're on the Beatles subject, I have to mention that Dwight is the only person I've ever met who can sit down at the piano and play the entire side two of Abbey Road from start to finish without stopping.
Stop it. For real?
Come on, Dwight.
I'm bound to do that, yeah.
Wow. That's impressive. What I love is hearing Steve explain the beginnings of your relationship and the things that he's talking about. I've experienced, and he's always poo-pooed how I felt about it. And I'm like, now I have some ammunition to say, see, you once felt this way when you walked into a writing room.
Yeah, I guess Dwight mentored me on that.
Well,
I get a little starry-eyed, Dwight. I get a little starry-eyed, and he's always been like, oh, they're just people. So he was once starry-eyed too.
Well, let me tell you one of my favorite stories. My very first professional co-writing experience was with Gary McSpadden, who was at the time in the first incarnation of the Gaither Vocal Band, when they were still called the New Gaither Vocal Band. And they had just recorded my songs on their first album. He came down to my level in Living Sacrifice. And I was invited to get together with Gary at his house to do some co-writing for just his use as a recording artist, because he was still doing solo albums. Well, I remember they lived in Brentwood in a 2-story house, and the piano was on the second floor. And I walked into the room and I sat down at the piano and I froze. I've always been known as the person who succeeded in the music business in spite of being about as unprofessional as you can get. That's kind of part of my reputation. Well, here's a good example. I was sitting there at the piano and in his own home, and I said, Gary, I apologize. He had put a lyric sheet in front of me. I said, Gary, I apologize, but I just don't feel like I can really get started on this music and give you anything to listen to until I work alone for a few minutes. So could you just leave me with this for a few minutes? He said, well, sure, yeah. And he goes downstairs.
At least it's in his own house, right?
My wife, yes, this is his own house. and my wife, Denise, and his wife, Carol, they both kind of look at him like, what's going on? He said, he sent me out. he said he did a few minutes. He just sent me out. And they're all just kind of like, huh? Now, of course, it didn't take long for me to get very, very comfortable working with Gary. And we were great friends and great colleagues. And Gary is one of the, now it's becoming many people in this business that I miss greatly because he's no longer with us. But that is probably my funniest story of being starstruck because I heard Gary McSpadden, seen him on TV since I was a little boy. And that'll be another part of the story we get to, I'm sure, later of my whole background with music, listening to music all my life, watching music on TV all my life. But he was such a part of my whole life in music that I just at that moment could not even put my hands to the keyboard in his presence. Gary delighted in telling that story to people whenever we were in three-way co-writes or just when my name would come up in conversations. Gary delighted in that story. He just thought it was hilarious.
I love it. I love it. I always joke with Steve that I'm so glad I don't know like what these people have done that we talk to until like maybe later, because I'd probably trip over my own tongue most of the time. But I have to say, I was acquainted with you long before today because I sang a lot of Sandy Patty songs growing up, because who did not want to be Sandy Patty, right?
Of course. Yeah.
So
I didn't really want to be her, but I did.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. But so true story. Here's this little 14-year-old girl from East Michigan going to audition for Star Search. And what song does she sing? Pour on the Power. So just so you know.
Wow. That's so neat. Well, I've got some interesting stories about that song, but I don't know if they'll make the final cut. But one of the most interesting things about Pour on the Power, it is probably the only song that I am absolutely sure has been performed and has been very popular in gay bars over the years.
Stop. Well, I have to tell you this. I did audition in a bar, so I may have started that trend. I have no idea. It was a nightclub in downtown Detroit. Oh, wow. I'm clearing out the cobwebs today.
Once you write a song and it gets released, you have no control over where it goes. And it's actually, I find, one of the joys of songwriting to discover some of the places your children, quote unquote, have gone that you never dreamed.
Yeah.
That's true.
I love I can't remember if it was Michael Nesmith or Mickey Dolenz that said this in a concert when they were about to sing Daydream Believer. And Peter Tork may have even been still alive and with the band. One of them said, now that David's gone, this song doesn't belong to us anymore. It belongs to you. Sing it, and had the audience sing the song to them. And that has really become very real to me over the years, especially now that it's been so many years, is that really the songs have a life of their own that, in a way, I just sit back and I look at that and listen to what happens with them. It's not about me anymore. It is totally about the song.
So good. Dwight, can you share with us a little bit? How did you really get your start? Like, did you start writing at a very young age? What did that early years of your journey, what did that look like?
I loved music from infancy. My mother used to love to tell about how that when I was in my crib and music would come on the television, I would start just throwing a fit to be put in front of the TV. And it was always about music, whether it was the music in a commercial that I really liked, or it was a song that came on the TV. It was always music that made me demand to be set in front of the TV. And I began playing little ditties on the piano. I don't know if I was 3 or 4 when that happened, but there's a memory I very vividly recall when I was watching my older brother playing just a simple little chord sequence at the piano, like many children learn to play. So many of us learn to play heart and soul. But he was playing some other little thing that was in 3/4 time. Of course, I didn't know what 3/4 time was then, but it was, and it was just something going from a C chord to an F chord to a G chord. And I watched carefully as he played it, and suddenly it dawned on me. And like I said, I couldn't have been but 3 or 4 when this happened. It suddenly dawned on me what he was doing. And I'd always just beat at the piano. But all of a sudden, I knew what to do. And I went to the piano and I kind of rearranged it for my little hands and for 3 fingers, 1 finger of my left hand, 2 fingers of my right hand. And I played the same thing, but in my little derangement of it. And then my mother, who is listening from the kitchen, comes running in to the living room, throws her arms around me, standing behind me, and says, "Oh, Dwight, you have a gift. You have a gift." And I'm like, somebody get me out of here, because I was a But that was the beginning. Now, I wrote my first song when I was 10 years old. The title of it was You and Me. I wrote it in absolute imitation of the Monkees song Sometime in the Morning, because I just thought that was the perfect song and I wanted to write something just like it. I would not play it for a dog now, but it wasn't bad. It did actually make sense as an AABA structure. So it was okay. I can't remember a single word of it, but I could play you the melody. From there, I just continued creating songs. It took me a couple of years to get around to actually putting them in a notebook where I would remember the lyrics. But I started doing that about the time I was in 7th grade. And I still have those notebooks and still remember a lot of the tunes and could, get them out and play. And then sometime in the early 90s, I finally decided that all of those songs, all those juvenilia songs that I could remember, I needed to put down on tape. And I did that. And I finally digitized those tapes years later. So they're preserved. And I'm really glad I did that. And I was always a huge fan of music. I've often said to people that I am much more of a music fan than I am a musician. I'm much more of a song lover than I am a songwriter. I think even when I first met Steve, there was probably some point at which I told him, Steve, the honest truth is I'd much rather listen to music than write songs. That's how much I love music. And that's even become more the case as I've gotten past my season of lots of professional activity and consider myself at this point more or less a retired songwriter. It's become full circle. It's just about loving music again.
Well, I can say anybody who has seen your Facebook page would know that Dwight posts almost every day his listening playlist from the previous night, and it is
my late night listening. Yes.
It is so eclectic. I mean, there are just artists and songs from all over the place that confirm that love of music that you're talking about. And since you mentioned the Monkees twice already, I have to just take a moment to say I once sold Mickey Dolenz a lamp when I was working in a department store. So just
Can I have your autograph? I need his autograph now.
That is so cool.
I'm even more in awe of you now knowing this. Why have you held out about this fact so long?
I'd like to turn for a second to Dwight, to some of the ways you've contributed to Music for the Soul. For a while, you were the official pastor of Music for the Soul, and I appreciated that, especially early on in the life of the ministry. And you've also written some songs with us, and I want to play a little bit of one of those now, and then we'll talk about it.
I took a step or two or three, and then I fell and scraped a knee. You picked me up, you held my hand, and gently said, now try again. But now I walk quite easily, and now you say, please wait for me. We step so slowly down the hall, I take your arm so you won't fall. Returning the favor, I try to remember the times that you labored and made it feel like love. When it's not easy admitting you need me this way, try and remember I'm returning the favor.
So, okay, that's Returning the Favor from our project Dignity, Songs and Stories for Caregivers. Dwight, do you remember writing that song?
Oh, yes. I remember writing that song because it was based on my real life experiences I was going through at the time with my mother. So I have very clear memories of us writing that piece. Some of the things that are mentioned in the lyric, even though it's sung by a woman on the album, it's really things I was doing with my mother at the time we were writing that. My mother died at the age of 97. She was in fairly good health up till shortly before she died, but she was experiencing dementia. She would lose track of sometimes who she was talking to. She definitely got slower in her steps and her movements, and just about everything in that song was based on an experience I was having with my mother at the time.
I think when we write from that place, I once heard a songwriter say that if it's true for you, it's going to be true for somebody else. And I think for those who are living out the caregiving experience, who have walked that road, being able to share directly out of what you were going through is what's given the song its power and resonance.
I listened to it earlier today, just as part of my prep for this podcast, and I found myself all over again moved to tears by it. I think I might have even been in tears when we were writing it at times. It seems I remember maybe I was. It was very straight from the gut.
I always tell writers whenever I'm speaking at like a songwriting conference or anything, I always tell writers who are just starting out on the journey that unless you're willing to rip your chest open and throw your heart out on the table, you'll never get to anything that's worth hearing. That brutal honesty is what gives songs their ability to connect with people and change lives. And so I'm just grateful that you were willing to go there that day and that song is part of our catalog.
Well, I'm considered an honor to have it in the catalog. Thank you.
Well, I know it's definitely a blessing to me as well, and took care of my mom as she was dying of cancer. And, it is a beautiful gift to those who are walking with parents and those difficult days of watching them decline and almost having to become the parent. Is there any other music that helped you through those moments, Dwight, that might encourage other people that are listening who are in the middle of caregiving right now for a parent or a loved one?
The other song that Steve and I wrote for the Dignity Project, which was Love Will Have to Do It. That song really meant a lot to me as we were writing it also, because a lot of caregiving, and I've become a professional caregiver in recent years, so I've had even more experience with this, is the unpleasant task of confronting things that you would never want to do for anyone, and to do those things with a loving attitude. And also simply the fact that sometimes it really is just about impossible to make it a positive experience, that there are going to be times when you cannot actually hide your at least mild anger, especially in the case of dementia or Alzheimer's, when a person attacks you that you love deeply or care about deeply, and there you are having to receive and absorb that attack. That is probably the hardest experience. And that's when that song, Love Will Have to Do It, really becomes a reality. Is when, oh no, I cannot be kind to this person as they treat me this way. Something greater than me's got to rise up and do this. And it will.
Such great encouragement and words. I mean, I know that I have several friends that are caregiving currently, and it's just difficult too, especially if you have a parent that was more on the abusive side as a child, and then you are finding yourself taking care of them and declining and in pain and all those things. And I
Yeah,
just really,
I'm very, very fortunate that my parents were wonderful parents, and I didn't experience really much of that with my mother or my dad in being caregiver for them. Where I have experienced it, though, is in professional caregiving. There have been some episodes that I really had to call on the strength outside myself to even be able to do the job.
Well, I'd like to turn, as we near the end of our time together, to songwriting again, because there are two songs I want to talk about. One of them is, to this day, still, I think, my favorite Christian song that I've ever heard. The night I first heard it was at Davis Kid Bookstore, which is no longer in Nashville, but was a place where writers' nights happened back in the day, as they say. And you played a song one evening when you were doing a presentation there called As If I Were the Only One to Love, which is a song about the way God loves us. Can you tell us how that song came about?
There was this young lady I was mentoring as a writer, and she and her husband became friends of mine and Denise during that time. I've actually lost track of her. So, Regina Wilson, if you hear this podcast, will you please look me up on Facebook? But that's her name, Regina Wilson. She and I got together in 1986, I think it was, after I had been to Estes Park, Colorado, for the Christian Artist Seminar in the Rockies that they had back then, which eventually was moved to Nashville and became the Christian Artist Seminar that was part of GMA week, but they were still having it in Colorado. And that was my first chance to see the Rocky Mountains. And I had quite a peak experience, just experiencing how huge that land is compared to anything I had ever seen before. And it gave me a whole new understanding of how small I am and how vast this universe is, and then how much vaster, if that's a word, has to be, and yet how intimately we experience God in the details of our lives. All of that came on me at once. Well, Regina had a similar experience, but she had also heard a sermon recently in her life in which a pastor mentioned St. Augustine's statement that God loves each and every one of us as if there were no one else. And I don't know exactly how St. Augustine phrased that. And at the time we wrote the song, I didn't even know it was St. Augustine. I'd only learned that years later. But she said this phrase, as if we were the only ones to love. And I said, Regina, that's a song title. Let's call it As If I Were the Only One to Love. And from that, we just began building it. And it was, the song has a strange structure, as you know. It's kind of an imprecise structural form. So we didn't start trying to write a chorus, which is what I would usually do. We literally just started at the start and discussed kind of how to even go into the subject of the vastness of creation. And I remember saying, well, here's a trick I learned from Gloria Gaither. Instead of trying to make some big statement, let's take some little snapshots, images from nature, and just string them along and go from there. And that's how we came up with Sunlight, Moonglow, Bright Stars. God, my God, what an artist you are. And that was literally the first thing we came up with. And I remember we were literally flying by the seat of our pants as we created the melody. It was one of these songs that literally grew out of the first thought and just meandered its way to completion. We both felt, that this was really coming from another place, that we were kind of just letting this song flow through us. And so it was a wonderful experience writing it. I knew as soon as we had finished it that we had something very special. I also figured nobody would ever record it, which I'm very happy to have been wrong. But I remember taking it to a certain publisher because her publishing was free on it, and he had been very nice to me. He will forever remain nameless because he wouldn't want to spread about that he had ever said this. So he will remain nameless. But I took this to a certain publisher in Nashville, offering this publisher her part of it. And he said, Dwight, this is just a wonderful song, but I have no idea how to market it. And I was crushed, even though I had halfway expected that kind of reaction. So I went on from there, and a few days later, I had a co-writing session with Luke Garrett, who is another dear musical colleague who is no longer with us, and I really, really missed his presence on the planet. But we were having a co-write session, and I said to Luke, I've got this song, and I don't know what to do with it. I really would like to share it with you because I really believe in it. And I played him as if I were the only one. And Luke's response was so different. For one thing, Luke was this incredibly humble person. And so what he does is he says, Dwight, that's amazing. And then he says, why don't you pitch it to Cynthia Clausen? And I said, Luke, I want you to do it. I don't even know how to get it to Cynthia Clausen. You do it. And Luke said, oh, well, okay. And the rest is history. He did record the song. And, it was never released as a single. It never got that much airplay. But the beautiful thing about this song is, Steve, you are one of two professional songwriters I know who list this as your favorite all-time Christian song. I know of at least a couple of testimonials of people who chose not to commit suicide because of this song. And I've just had numerous reports through the years of people who, for some reason, this particular song really hit them at a pivotal moment of life and became a real touchstone song for them. So, and it's always been my personal favorite of all the songs I've ever written. So that makes it mean even more when somebody says what you just said, Steve, that it's actually your favorite Christian song. Thank you. I'm so deeply honored.
Well, you're welcome. And I would say the only thing that could be as beautiful as the sentiment of the song is the melody. So if you haven't heard that, folks, go looking for it. As If I Were the Only One to Love It. It will be totally worth your time. One more song, though, Dwight. I would be remiss if I didn't say that you're the only personal friend I have who has a song in the hymnal.
Well, yeah. Which hymnal do you mean? I shouldn't have said that. That sounds very egotistical. I actually have something in several hymnals. So which one are we talking about?
Well, you've shared the story with me of how you came to write it. So please share with our audience how you came to create We Are an Offering.
I figured that was the one. Okay, that's another song where it felt like I was taking dictation. I was in my parents' home. Denise and I were living in a trailer next door to my parents at the time. I have often jokingly said that it was probably the only house trailer in North America at the time with a gold record on the wall.
That's great.
And that was for Pour on the Power, by the way, Becky.
Yes.
And I was writing, and I was kind of on a roll that day. I actually wrote 3 songs that day in a morning. I was just feeling very creative. I'd written one of the 3, and I was sitting at the piano looking at my title list thinking, I feel like going on writing another one. What could I do? I'm looking at my title list, and the phrase "We Are an Offering" was in my title list, and it's one I had lived with. I think I had shared with a co-writer or 2, and nothing had happened with it. But then all of a sudden, I just heard it and put my hands to the piano and started playing it and just singing the words. And when I get like maybe 3 phrases into what I was doing, I would stop and jot down what I just sung. And basically the song wrote itself in the time it takes to sing it. And I have never really understood that was probably the easiest song for me to ever write. And it is, in fact, my biggest copyright. And it was effortless. And I always felt like I was just taking dictation on that one.
What I love is the word pictures you gave us. I can see you at that piano. And I think for a lot of aspiring writers, they get a vision of it being so glamorous, but really it often starts in a humble beginning, wouldn't you say?
Mm.
And in spaces that you least expect and meetings that only God can orchestrate. Could you give us just maybe 2 quick tips to the young aspiring writer out there that's maybe listening and wanting to be a professional songwriter? What would you encourage them with?
Well, Steve already gave one of the most important ones, I think, which is you've got to be willing to lay your heart on the table as an open book to write anything worth writing. The thing I always tell young writers is you've got to do a lot of listening. Basically, your record collection is going to be like the reference library in an attorney's office. It's going to be the volumes of lore that you study to become a master of this craft you're doing. So listen is one of the main things I say to young writers. And when you hear something that moves you, then stop, take it apart, look at every aspect of it and try to figure out why it did that. What kind of melody that really is? What is the arc of it? What are the highs and lows of it? And at what point in all of that did it strike your heart or bring a tear to your eye or make you feel butterflies? And how did that happen? Now, sometimes it happens in spite of the writer, just like the taking dictation moments that I've talked about. But sometimes it is actually something that a writer purposely constructs to create an emotion. And that can be just as effective as the other way that it happens, when it's just a zap of inspiration. It can be just as effective when it's built. I know that from the experience of writing thousands of songs over the years, some of which had that because of a zap of inspiration, others of which had that because we constructed the song with that in mind. That's the main thing. I think it's really important to study great songs.
Great advice. Great advice. And write, and then write some more, right?
Absolutely. I mean, how many publishers have I heard say that to writers? Except they've said it to everybody but me. I'll explain that in a minute. But I so many times I've either read in interviews with publishers, producers, or songwriters, or I've heard publishers say it in their office, write another one, write another one. But they never said that to me, because they always told me, Dwight, you're really piling these songs up. Please slow down. We can't keep up with it.
It's a fire hose in here.
So, but to any other writer, I would say, write another.
Well, Dwight, it has just been an absolute delight to have you on today, and we'll have to have you back because I know there are so many other great stories that you could share. Thank you for the wisdom that you've passed on to writers and for telling us some of these stories. It's been an absolute joy.
Yes, thank you so much.
Well, thank you, both of you. This has been fun. It really has.
If you enjoyed the discussion today, please share it with a friend and give us a positive review on iTunes.
And please visit our website, musicforthesoul.org, where you can stream or download every song in our catalog, including Returning the Favor, and read our lyrics, our healing music guide, our blog posts, and much more. Thank you for listening. God bless.
I took a step or two or three, and then I fell and scraped a knee. You picked me up, you held my hand, and gently said, now try again. But now I walk quite easily, and now you say, please wait for me. We step so slowly down the hall, I take your arm so you won't fall. Returning the favor, I try to remember the times that you labored and made it feel like love. When it's not easy admitting you need me this way, try and remember I'm returning the favor. You say to me, I'm so ashamed I called you by your brother's name. We talk a few more minutes, then you call me by his name again. I almost say, no, that's not me, but then I stop and let it be. So many times I made mistakes, and you replied, well, that's okay. Returning the favor, I try to remember the times that you labored and made it feel like love. When it's not easy admitting you need me this way, try and remember I'm returning